Welcome to BaseVision Inside Security Episode 6. Today we are talking about incident response and real cases, what happened, what were the impact. With me are two members of our CSR team, Gianluca and Mark, which are supporting here and providing insights in their life or in their experience. So probably just as a first thing, what was the worst experience you ever had in an incident response case? Probably Mark. What do you think?
It depends, really. I mean, depends what you consider as worse. You have worse for me, worse for the client. I had an incident response case, for example, at 2 a.m. I was called. It was some vulnerability, and I had to basically investigate it. The client basically joined the call, and then he didn't join the call the second time. Okay, what happened? We're doing incident response now. So that was very complicated. And then we have obviously ransomware. Ransomware is very tiring when it comes to incident response. The whole team is generally multiple people working together at one time. And I would say that the biggest case that we had in my previous company was we had over 400 hours of incident response. The story is that essentially two companies were kind of working hand in hand. They shared a network together. One company was compromised, and then they basically followed through the domain controller onto the other company. There was a one-way tunnel between them, compromised both companies, and it was a rush. There was two incident response companies working at the same time. Each one was trying to solve the situation, and we were basically following breadcrumbs, and we would say, okay, it came from this system, and they said, oh, we can't investigate that system, it belongs to the other company. So that was a very unique case, and that actually was 4 different sites were compromised. So you had Switzerland, you had also in America as well, and as well in I think it was in Scandinavia. There was some points there. So it was a huge incident, and that was probably the biggest case that I ever had. Yeah. Very complicated.
Very complicated, but all what you mentioned was more or less organizational topics, management more, and not the technical stuff at the end.
At the end, correct. Surprisingly, it was not as technical as you would have thought, because like I said, we picked up the breadcrumbs, we followed it, and then it was always a blocker, and then there was some issues between the company, and they didn't want to put them in each other's issues, where they said, oh, that was your fault, or that was your fault. So there was that kind of blockers. So that was, complicated in that sense, but at the end of the day.
So organization made it complicated at the end.
Yes, basically, yes.
Gianluca, do you have something to add, or what was your worst experience?
I think the worst experience I was in, or I can still remember, was also a ransomware case. And the encryption was already progressed to a stage where we knew basically we can't really make something with the systems which were encrypted, so we had to restore in a new clean environment. And the backups were unaffected on site, but they had, luckily, an off-site backup. And then when we drove through to the off-site location, turns out the replication didn't work for more than a year. So we had 1 year old data we could restore. I mean, it's better than nothing, but still, on the next day, the company started off by paper and pen. Yeah. For a few days. I mean, just to keep the business running as best as possible, calling customers. But yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, most errors are basic IT things, regular checks, basic security hygiene.
For sure.
Yeah. And the response time. You mentioned it was already too far, so as well, having a fast detection is quite important at the end.
Yeah.
Okay. From all these cases which you have, what are lessons which you have learned? What would you say is the biggest thing what you have not learned in school books? What have you learned based on just practical, hands-on experience?
I can maybe mention something. People think that incident response is purely technical, and that's to some extent, yes, that's correct. But there are also things where the psychological side also comes into play, which is people don't think about. So I'll give you an example. We have an IT provider working for a client, and they have ransomware, and then you're basically dealing with the IT provider. The IT provider basically has a conflict of interest because it's not in their best interest to help you. So then you have this psychological impact. How do I get this person to assist me with the investigation in order to solve the story for the client? Bearing in mind that maybe the IT provider is the one who caused the issue in the first place, which I have seen. the IT provider actually didn't update, for example, the firewall for 1 year, ended up getting compromised, and it was a big issue. So then it's dealing with people. You know, how do we handle this if someone's not being cooperative? How do you handle them? So there's that completely other aspect to think about, which is not just technical.
I think this could be definitely something which is important. Blaming someone in a cyber incident is not the best thing you could do as well for the culture, for the company.
Sure.
It could be very negative as well for the future if you start blaming some employees which probably clicked on an executable or whatever. So I think that's something which should never happen if you have a cyber incident. You should work together.
For sure.
Yeah. Gianluca, do you have something, or what would be your lesson learned?
I think for me, in school or also in courses, mostly we focus on technical stuff, on forensic stuff, to conduct investigations. And the thing we rarely speak about is, it also goes a bit towards people management. It's more like take breaks. Who has an overview of the whole task force? Usually we have an incident response lead who is the main responsible for the technical investigation itself. But if we're talking about bigger cases which take several days, we usually, or that's what we recommend, is also have an incident response manager who has an overview, a complete overview, because it's quite easy if you are deep within an investigation, the hours fly by, and after a few hours your brain is completely fried, and then that's also the time usually when errors are made, which then cost also time in the end. So just organizing beforehand, or have a rough plan, when do we take breaks? Who is bringing in lunch? It's those easy things which often got forgotten.
My wife helps me with that usually. When I have an incident, she's the one who's always like, all right, I'll handle the kids, off you go. And then I luckily, I don't have to handle those things.
So next incident response manager in that case.
I guess so.
No. So that were lessons learned, but we talked about worst cases, but did you have as well success stories where you say, hey, that was really flawless, yes, it could be handled fast, it was running like in the playbook?
One case that comes into mind is one we had last week, which was related to a React to Shell vulnerability. And
big story, you know.
Yeah, that's true. And we noticed it quite early, also because of the SOC. Shouldn't now be a talk to sell a SOC, but we really see that having good detections, and especially early detections, also helps us to jump in early enough to do the containment that the attack doesn't spread.
But you have to mention as well, we had a very interesting story because our threat intel team were doing a hunt. They found that the one machine was compromised, and then we got an alert from Microsoft Defender as well. And then we ended up investigating.
More or less at the same time.
At the same time.
Cool.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. Yeah.
But that's definitely a huge success if we see, okay, the detections have worked, but as well, threat hunting is then another discipline which can jump in and can help to detect cases. But yeah, you mentioned it at the beginning and now again, time to respond. That's probably the most important thing to handle a case correctly. Not waiting until Friday evening to call someone else and before trying to handle it by self.
Yeah, that's also something, sometimes customers hesitate to call or they want to fix it themselves. And most of the time it gets worse. So it's easier if they involve experts at an earlier stage.
Yes. By trying to save a bit of money, by thinking I don't want to, engage incident response, and then you ended up having full encryption, and it's like you end up spending more. So, I had a similar incident like that actually, where again it was an IT provider. They ended up calling us. They were not our client. This was from before, and they called us and said we found something. They had an EDR. Luckily, it was like a SonicWall EDR that they were using, which I didn't even know at the time they had one. They got some alerts. We went in and they said, okay, it looks like threat actor is in the environment. We found that the VPN was compromised. They got in, but there was no encryption yet, and we were able to basically remediate it and push them out. And that was a good story because the client ended up basically saving themselves from having a big issue. But
So early detection, then the correct response helps to
Yes.
early contain a specific threat, and then you don't have that much of work. And as well, bringing the expertise, if you see it's now further, bringing in the expertise as soon as possible is then quite important in that case.
Yes.
So I think that's a very good summary about now, about your lessons learned, what we have, and about the cases which we can talk here. It was very cool to have you here as well to share your opinion, your experience with all of you. And stay tuned for one of the next episodes where we will talk about other things, but as well in the future, definitely talk more about CSIRT cases as well.